All right, hello everyone, and welcome to today's Community of Practice webinar. It's our first webinar that we're hosting, and on the topic of developing effective mentorship programs for internationally educated professionals. So a few people I see were typing that they can't hear. Can all of you hear now? Okay, great. Okay, so my name is Kaylee Quinn, and I'm the project coordinator of the Post-Secondary Bridge Programming Initiative for internationally educated professionals and internationally experienced tradespeople. And I'm so happy to welcome all of you here to this event, as well as to welcome our host, Peter Paul, who is a project leader with Allies Canada, which stands for Assisting Local Leaders with Immigrant Employment Strategies. So before I turn this session over to Peter, I just wanted to give those of you who are new to the Community of Practice a quick overview. So the Community of Practice is a component of the Qualification Recognition Supports and Post-Secondary Bridge Programming Initiative for IEPs and IETs project. And this project is funded through Employment and Social Development Canada with the Foreign Credential Recognition Program. And it's being co-led by Manitoba Education and Advanced Learning, as well as Manitoba Labour and Immigration. So the objectives of the Community of Practice are primarily to create an opportunity for individuals who work with internationally educated professionals and internationally experienced tradespeople to come together to network, to learn, and to collaborate on various topics that relate to IEPs and IETs, such as developing mentorship programs. So that brings me to the objectives of this session today. And so just to reiterate, in case people missed this in the emails that were sent out, this is the first presentation of a two-part series on developing and sustaining effective mentorship programs for IEPs and IETs. So the objectives for this first sort of foundational session are what is a mentorship program and how does it operate? What is involved, or who is involved rather, in a mentorship program, and what benefits are offered to participants, both the mentors and mentees. Then we'll take a look at some of the various formats of delivery and implementation of mentorship programs, and then some examples of promising practices of mentorship programs that are running in Canada that specifically support IEPs and IETs. So with that, I would like to turn the floor over to Peter with Allies Canada to speak about his work with the National Mentoring Initiative.
Thank you, Kaylee. It's my privilege to be here today. I appreciate this opportunity to share a few thoughts on our work and what we've learned about mentoring in the course of the last 6 years that we've been working primarily through the Immigrant Employment Councils, but also as part of a national mentoring network that's being developed across Canada. So I just want to give you a 30-second version of our work and how that has informed what we've learned about mentoring. So Allies was set up to help create immigrant employment councils in various urban centers across Canada. These immigrant employment councils were to be convening employer-led initiatives that were going to work with local service delivery partners, governments, regulatory bodies, colleges and universities, pardon me, and other stakeholders to develop programs such as mentoring that might actually have a large impact on the integration of newcomers into the labor market. So we've established a network of about 10 immigrant employment councils across the country, and that one of the things that we've seen is that mentoring has become a signature program for many of these immigrant employment councils because it is seen to be so effective and because it's a great strategy to bring many more employers to the table. Just a very quick word on what it is and how does it work. So, you know, I know that among the audience there are some who have very sophisticated long-running programs, and there are some who are still quite new to this and have recently launched programs. So very briefly, I'll just talk through a few of the ideas that go around this concept of mentoring and this program and why it is so effective. Primarily, mentoring derives its value from Canadian professionals, and that's really an important point to make at the very outset, that the value of the program is brought by Canadian professionals who are donating and volunteering their time to help a newcomer build their professional network, to help them improve their job search strategy, to enhance a newcomer's understanding of what it means to be an accountant or an engineer, and to familiarize them in general with the Canadian workplace. So it's actually tailor-made for the newcomer by someone who is his or her peer. And I think that's what makes mentoring such an effective strategy. How does it work? Very briefly, there are a couple of key areas of focus for mentoring. The model that I'll talk about in some depth is the model that, asks the mentor to commit 24 hours over a 4-month period. So that means it's approximately an hour and a half a week. Now, not all these meetings are in person. Some of them can be online. You attend webinars together. You can attend online job fairs. It could be going out and meeting some others. All of these things are part of what create a better strategy for a newcomer. But the main areas of focus here is what we call the win areas. That's workplace values and culture, information about their profession in Canada, and about expanding their networks. And all the kind of research and studies that we've seen seem to suggest that these are the 3 areas in which most of the value is to be derived from the newcomer's perspective. I just want to make one other point here, and that is that mentors and mentees decide the pace of their relationship, the primary focus, the logistics of how they go about the mentoring process. There has to be inbuilt a certain level of flexibility into the program so that it meets the needs of both the mentor and the mentee. But we've seen mostly over the past several years in mentoring programs that the idea of expanding a mentee's network, the idea of providing them information on their profession or information on how to go through the licensure process, if applicable, or other kinds of regulatory processes that a newcomer might have to go through, are hugely impactful, and that's where most mentors and mentees spend a significant amount of their time together working on. So a brief word on a mentee profile, and this is something that sometimes we can take for granted. These are newcomers who are skilled. They've come here either as federal skilled workers or through the provincial nominee program, and we tend to often think of them in those categories. Mentoring calls for folks to essentially be job ready. Even before they join the program, it is really important to ensure that the mentee is job ready to meet with an employer from his or her field. And I stress this especially for programs that are starting out and that are quite new. If you want to engage more and more employers, they have to have a very successful match, a successful relationship with their mentee. And that means that the mentee has to be job ready. They have to be highly functional in English or French, depending on where you are and what the profession, what the specific occupation is. They have to have all their credentials assessed and recognized if applicable. And it's really important that they have a significant amount of professional work experience that can easily be translated into equivalent work experience here in Canada. And I just want to stress that that is really important, especially for some of the new programs that are emerging. A brief word on the mentor and who the mentor is. We want to see a mentor who is an established professional. And we define that, on the one hand, we want them to be fairly experienced and senior so that they have the actual experience that they can impart to a newcomer. But on the other hand, you don't want to shoot yourself in the foot and have someone who's really well experienced and senior, because then it reduces the pool of possible mentors. So a happy medium is, we say, a Canadian professional who has a minimum of 3 years work experience and who is willing to make a commitment to mentor for 24 hours over 4 months. We found that seems to be the model that most places adopt. in fairness, there are other programs that are run really well that have that request smaller commitments from their mentors as well. Some typical activities that the mentor and mentee undertake are they conduct mock interviews, they review cover letter and resumes together, they sometimes do some job shadowing, the mentor helps connect the mentee with people in his or her network so that the mentee can go out and conduct a few information interviews. They can sometimes attend some events together, and at the end of the day, they have to have a really sometimes very frank conversation about what it takes to make it in the Canadian workplace, and what is it we often see in newcomers and one of the things that we often see in many newcomers is not a very clear understanding of what are the kinds of soft skills that are so important in many workplaces. So it's about a frank conversation around that, and how a mentor can help a mentee improve on these soft skills. What are the tools and the tips that can be used to help move that conversation along? I'm using a program structure that's borrowed from the mentoring partnership here in Toronto through TRIAC, but this is largely adapted to many of the mentoring programs that we see across the country. The number of hours and the way the coaching works might be slightly different from program to program, but I'm just going to talk about in the context of an urban area where you have quite a few service delivery partners coming together to deliver a coordinated program. This seems to work well. So on the one hand, you have the corporate partners, and these are Canadian employers who are providing the mentors to the program. These are volunteers. You have a intermediate group that actually goes out and recruits these mentors from these employers, and also is responsible for the matching of the newcomers, the mentees, with their appropriate mentor by occupation. The mentees are enter the stream through the community partners, the immigrant serving organizations. They are pre-screened, they are job ready, and they're ready to be matched with a mentor. And so it's this matching that's really critical. It has to be as close in occupation as possible. Too often we see, well, we just put engineers together and see how this works out. But it's really, in our experience, it's really important to have a mechanical engineer who works on certain kinds of projects matched with a mechanical engineer, so that there is actually a really close alignment of their understanding of the occupation and the profession here, the kinds of exams they'll have to go through, the best prep courses to take. All of those kinds of things happen only when there's a real close understanding of their occupation here in Canada. So there's also, as you can see, the role of the mentoring coach that kind of serves as a coach to both the mentor and the mentee. We've seen in our experience in the program, the coach can play such a critical role in making sure that the mentor is well prepared to undertake this relationship, to actually be of value to the mentee. And we also see that the coach is a wonderful additional supplemental coach to the mentee as well, who's able to alleviate any kinds of anxieties or any kind of concerns that the mentee might have about the way the mentoring relationship is going forward, or to help to work out some of the logistical details, or for any other kind of support. At the end of the day, it's two people who are probably coming together from very different backgrounds, and sometimes you need a third party kind of thing to be in between to help, just smooth over some of the starting anxieties that might happen when being introduced to someone who's quite different from you, other than the fact that you share an occupation. So the coach also just, serves as a sounding board for how things are going. The coach checks in with the mentor and mentee on a monthly basis, often at least, just to check in to see if things are on track, if they've identified the key objectives that they want to accomplish through the relationship. Are they on track to actually cover all the areas that they said they were going to cover during the mentoring relationship? So the coach plays a very critical role, and I want to highlight that role as a kind of a best practice that needs to be thought about as you expand or develop further your mentoring programs. It's really worth having some coaching sessions for the coaches themselves so that they could be more effective. I'll just, before I move to the other slide, I want to just, in this case, in the program here at the Toronto Region Immigrant Employment Council at TRIAC's Mentoring Partnership, TRIAC is responsible for the outreach to the employer partners and to the settlement agencies so that they're bringing in and expanding more and more employers as mentors and settlement partners as mentees. They are responsible for training and the mentoring resources development so that mentors feel better prepared and mentees are prepared as well to get the best out of the mentoring relationship, and they also manage the quality control aspects of the program. So this is a way that it's been adopted in several other cities where there is a high degree of cooperation and coordination between service delivery partners as well. Just to give you a kind of snapshot of the scope of what we've seen, and these are just based on our conversations with folks in the National Mentoring Network that we are working with right now. Over 100 immigrant serving agencies that have mentoring programs participate in this network. At least 2,000 matches are happening every year across the country. There are over 110 employers who are participating in mentoring at any given time. And we find almost consistently, and I want to stress this, about 70% of the mentees find work. It's higher in some areas depending on the local labor market and the program and the supports available to the mentors and the mentees. And it's lower in some areas where there might not be as much demand for the kinds of skills and talents that newcomers are bringing. But in general, we find that mentoring is hugely successful, and we'll talk a little bit about the impact of the program in a few minutes. But I also just want to throw out a couple of notable partners that we've seen. There are some organizations, and I've just highlighted two of them here, that have over 1,000 matches in the last 5-6 years since the program began. And this is, again, just in Toronto as examples. The TD Bank Group has over 1,000 mentoring matches, and going great guns. They've probably crossed 1,100 matches now. The City of Toronto, another fantastic champion, has over 1,000 matches. And the reason I highlighted that was we often think of employers as purely businesses. Governments are huge employers in Canada, all three levels of government, and I think they have a mandate to be involved in this kind of work. And so, do call on your government partners to be mentors, because they can be hugely effective because they have a pretty good idea of the local context, of the local business climate, all of those kinds of things. So never forget to include your local governments, your provincial governments, and the federal governments in your jurisdictions as possible sources of, rich sources of mentors as well. We've got 17 national partners. These are large businesses that operate across multiple provinces, across multiple cities. It's a great network of employers. All of our large employers are in here, the big banks, the insurance companies, some of the resource companies, Canadian Pacific, Enbridge, those companies like that. So it's a great network of people that we hope will continue to grow going forward as well. So that's just a kind of snapshot of the kind of things that are happening in Canada right now. Most of the lessons we've drawn are from working with these folks as part of the National Mentoring Initiative. I want to talk very briefly about what's in it for the mentor. And we're often asked this question, are we calling on mentors to just do good work out of the goodness of their heart? Are we calling on their better natures to give to the community, to be involved in the community? That's definitely a part of it. But many mentors become mentors because there's something in it for them. And many corporate partners, these are corporate partners who systematically and periodically invite mentoring programs to come in and do information sessions about mentoring in their respective boardrooms or in their lunchrooms and so on. Participate in mentoring because there's a huge impact that they see for the mentors. You can see, and I've left the screen up for a little bit, but you can see how there's a behavioral change, a change of understanding of the skills that newcomers bring to the table before mentoring and after mentoring. And you can see that these are all significant changes in the way mentors start to think about international talent, their willingness to hire international talent if they have the right requirements for the job, and the confidence that they can work effectively with a recent newcomer. The reality is, in our cities, in our boardrooms, in our businesses, most managers today have to work with a diverse team. And mentoring has proven to be one of those really practical, effective strategies that are helping managers work with a more diverse team, be more effective, understand how you communicate maybe slightly differently, understanding what people are saying to you. All of those kinds of things come together by just spending time with a newcomer. And so many companies are seeing mentoring as leadership development for their employees, for their managers, for their high potential people on track to management. So we see that you can see at each of those categories, it has a very real, tangible impact on the mentor. It's a win-win in that sense for the mentee and for the mentor. I just want to highlight the fourth point there about, before the mentoring relationship, 76% of the mentors were willing to hire a newcomer. And at the end of the mentoring relationship, after 4 months, 95% of them were willing to hire a newcomer. That's a huge change. That tells me that after mentoring, almost all the mentors were willing to hire a newcomer because they clearly understood the skills and talents that the newcomer is bringing. They could see that these were professionals. They were just lacking in some Canadian work experience. They were lacking in their connections. They were lacking in their understanding probably of the specifics of their occupation in Canada. But it seems like almost all of them are willing to hire newcomers. And if you think there are 2,000 matches every year, that's 2,000 people who kind of moved in the direction of being willing to hire a newcomer, which is hugely impactful. And if you think about all the mentoring matches that are happening in different sectors, people's minds and hearts are being changed through this partnership. And I think that's hugely impactful. This is part of our nation building, that we're building a whole group of Canadian professionals who are now seeing the value that newcomers are bringing and are able and willing to hire a newcomer with the right skills for the right job. So I think, like we've often said, mentoring is often, referred to as a win-win, but this is how you see, in a very tangible way, the mentors themselves are benefiting in concrete and practical ways that are benefiting them personally, but also benefiting their companies. I want to switch gears a little bit and just talk about a recent mentoring survey that we conducted with mentoring programs across the country. We targeted 11 mentoring programs in 9 cities across the country. And with the help of Accenture, we conducted this survey of mentees to understand, their experience in mentoring, but also the impact, primarily the economic and the earning impact that mentoring had on them. So just the key findings, you can find the full report on alliescanada.ca or on hireimmigrants.ca. You can download the full report. But I'm just going to focus on a couple of key findings. We saw overall that there was an improved economic standing across the board for mentees, across different regions, across different professions. We saw that the unemployment rate that started out at 73% prior to the mentoring program dropped to 19% within 12 months of finishing the mentoring program. We saw that the increased full-time earnings, because there were quite a few people who had started working prior to being matched with their mentors, but we saw a significant improvement, a 62% improvement in the earning of these folks within 12 months of completing the mentoring relationship. other findings, we saw that 65% were employed full-time versus just 13% at the start of the mentoring relationship. And this is a huge impact because a lot of folks are working part-time when they come, and very often they're working in occupations that are not related to their international experience or their education. In this instance, we see that 65% are employed full-time, 71% of them are employed in their field, versus only 27 at the start of the mentoring relationship, and 47% of them were at an appropriate level, meaning commensurate with their past position while they were still working overseas. So we see overall, the trajectory of how newcomers are, mentees are being impacted is not just in earnings, but in their overall trajectory going forward. They are much better positioned to benefit by this mentoring relationship. We see that also that people who find full-time work are more likely to receive employee benefits, which in itself is a huge deal for a lot of folks, particularly those with families. It's a big deal, and it's an added, kind of effective earning, really, when you think about it. And we all know that improved employment outcomes decreases the cost to government in a variety of ways, not to mention that, the benefit to government is not just in decreased spending that may go towards social programs and so on if people are living in poverty, but it's also in terms of the earning potential and the taxes that are generated by people working full-time in their respective profession. So, these are purely the economic benefits that we kind of try to understand through this. In addition, of course, we have to remember that, there are the additional benefits, friendships develop, a better sense of being connected to the community, more exposure to Canadian norms and customs. So these are some of the other social benefits that accrue from, these kinds of connections that develop through mentoring, a kind of bond that develops between professionals and new Canadians, Canadian professionals and new Canadians, that in the long term just builds a nation that's much more understanding, much more able to leverage each other's talents and skills and so on. But like I said, I think we focused the survey purely on the economic tangibles, and those are very significant as well, as you can see. I'll just talk about a couple of the comments that we saw from the survey. These are direct quotes from mentees as they articulated it in the survey. And you see it addresses a couple of different areas that mentoring touches on. One thing that I kind of didn't talk about but is huge, and we hear this over and over again, is that mentors impart a sense of confidence to mentees. And that, in my own experience as a mentor, I see that's a huge role that mentors can play. And I think it's really important to, many mentors prior to going into the mentoring relationship often wonder what is it that they really have to offer a newcomer. And they might doubt their own ability to say, I can't speak on behalf of all the people in the accounting profession or whatever the occupation or sector or company may be. And so often it's coaches who are able to assist mentors develop the confidence to be really champions for newcomers. And in that process, you see that the mentees themselves draw so much more confidence from their mentors. And that's one of the critical things that we also hear mentees get out of a mentoring relationship. I'll just pause to say that please type in your questions in the chat box. We'll make sure we have plenty of time to get to those when we finish the presentation. So feel free to type in your questions in the chat box, and I hope we'll have time to get to them after the presentation. I just want to talk about a couple of other models of mentoring that we've seen across Canada. I mentioned that we have over 100 organizations that deliver mentoring programs. We've talked primarily so far about the one-on-one mentoring, which is a Canadian professional sits down for a certain amount of time over 12 weeks or 16 weeks and goes over a fairly detailed, structured kind of handbook or goes through a fairly rigorous agenda for the mentoring relationship. There are some other models. One model is group mentoring. And group mentoring, we've seen it work in a couple of different contexts. Group mentoring works really well in places where you often find it quite challenging in certain sectors to find a large number of mentors. So, you might be in a situation where you have, 5 or 6 people who are, let's say, in HR, but you're not able to find as many mentors in HR at that time. Rather than keep the mentees waiting for a long time, in some instances, they've actually gone ahead and had group mentoring sessions, particularly with SMEs, where the mentor might not have time to re-mentor and participate over and over again. It's really important to, in this instance, be flexible, that you're not going to necessarily get a very, very strict match between a mechanical engineer and a mechanical engineer who do similar kinds of projects. In group mentoring situations, you might have to put people in a certain technical field together to try and work it out, because it's a lack of finding the right amount of mentors in this instance. Another instance where we've seen this work very effectively has been with in the professional immigrant network. So these are groups that are self-organized. These are groups like the Filipino Accountants Association or the Iraqi Engineers Association or the Romanian Engineers Association. They are often ethnocentric based. They are always professional in their outlook, in the sense that they are around an occupation or a profession. These groups sometimes have group mentoring sessions that they organize themselves. And in that instance, it's useful because the mentor is able to direct his or her attention to about 4 or 5 people, and I would recommend no more than 5 at any given time. In this instance, they are able to help the newcomers, from their particular home country, navigate a little bit of the credential recognition process. They're able to understand specifically what a person's role might have meant in their home country, what their educational gaps may be, what kinds of courses might be useful to them given their language ability, or particular gaps in their experience or education from their home country. So it's much more around those kinds of activities that we've seen group mentoring be very effective. Sometimes there are people who are in mentees, newcomers, who are not confident to approach a Canadian professional and have the whole relationship in English, and maybe their language is not up to par at that point. Group mentoring offers an opportunity where someone understands you. Even if you struggle with the language, you can sometimes slip back into your your mother tongue, and someone's able to help you out with that. I think one of the big things in mentoring in general is to help the newcomer feel comfortable in the Canadian workplace. So I would kind of caution against having these group mentoring sessions done ethno-specifically in a language other than English or French, depending on your context. But I think it's one model that seems to work, that provides some level of comfort, even if it's for the short term. Speed mentoring is something that has also been quite popular. It's happened. We've seen it happen in many contexts. It's like speed dating, where you bring in maybe 10 or 12 people from a particular sector or from a particular organization, a certain business. Sometimes these large businesses like to do this, where they can bring in people for part of their volunteerism day or part of their professional development opportunities. They bring in people and they'll sit and they'll do 10 to 15 minute mentoring sessions with newcomers. Maybe 25 newcomers will each have a chance to sit with 3 or 4 people from a bank or from Kraft Foods or some of these large employers. Pardon me. So it's a very quick and easy way to do mentoring. It's a way to get an employer's appetite whet to be a better champion, a better fit for your one-on-one mentoring program going forward. It's a kind of way to get them in the door, and many employers love the quick thing of it, of just one afternoon session. Pardon me. That's able to get 10 or 12 of their employees to give back to the community, and it helps position the employer well in the community as well. E-mentoring is a relatively new program that's been happening for the last few years, and there are two aspects to it. One is sometimes e-mentoring happens from people who are perhaps in an urban area but are not able to find a mentor in that area, so they find, a mentee who is located in a smaller community, not able to find a mentor, is able to connect with a mentoring program in an urban area, and they could have an e-mentoring relationship either by telephone, by email, or by Skype. And there's another side to this, and that component is where you have people who are still overseas who are being mentored by Canadian professionals who are here already. And this has happened through several service delivery partners here in the Toronto area, and I'm sure in other cities as well. I think this is a great way in which employers are able to connect with people while they're still overseas. It's a good way that's relatively flexible for a mentor to participate. You can always exchange emails on your own time. You can set up times for Skype calls, things like that. So it's very flexible. It's still, like I said, in the early stages. We haven't seen many matches of this happen yet, but it's growing. And I think in the future, going forward, with the emphasis on overseas services, this is going to expand. Peer-to-peer mentoring refers specifically to newcomers who have since found work, then becoming mentors and mentoring other newcomers because they've been able to walk the walk themselves. They picked up valuable lessons on what worked and what didn't. So this is a way for them to actually kind of give back because they've been beneficiaries of some of these programs. So I want to say these are just different ways. I think we'll go in much more detail in the in-person follow-up session that follows next time. But these are kind of some of the larger kind of different models that we've seen being developed. So I want to just talk about very quickly two promising practices that we've seen. One is this idea of employers as partners. We've always thought about in the settlement sector primarily, we often think about employers as partners, yes, but we're always asking them to do something. We're all asking for favors. I think mentoring is one of those programs where many community partners, many immigrant serving agencies now are able to see that there's something very tangible and real that an employer is getting back. They are developing their staff. They are building the leadership skills of their management team. This is very tangible, very real for them. So you're approaching them on an even foot and saying, here's a partnership that can work. It's give and take on both ends. And we're seeing more and more employers be systematically involved in mentoring, where they're making mentors available on a regular cycle every 4 months or every 6 months. They're having a new cohort of mentors join these mentoring programs. So this is still, it's not new entirely, but I think it's changed the focus of the way many service providers are approaching employers with a new sense of confidence that we have something very real to offer you, and not just thinking about the social justice arguments, but being able to highlight a mutual benefit. You see, when you have employers as partners, from their perspective, it's a much quicker access to many more prospective and quality mentors all at once. So it works out well for them. It's easier for them to arrange group training or orientation for mentor sessions on site when they have, when they do this on an ongoing basis. Suddenly you're able to tap into the hidden job market for the mentee side, but also you're able to access a large number of mentees and their talents quite quickly by having your mentors be eyes and ears on the ground for your organization. So the other thing that I'll just quickly highlight is many programs have come to understand that the mentor-mentee orientation session is so critical. It really sets clear expectations on the clarity of the role for both the mentor and the mentee. There's a clear understanding of what happens at each stage of the mentoring relationship, and it basically leads to a successful start, launches them on the right trajectory so that they find the right balance for the working relationship between the mentor and mentee, and it clarifies the role of the coach. So I'll just, very briefly before we go to Q&A, I just want to say what we've learned in developing your mentoring program or expanding it. When you're approaching government or you're approaching employers and so on, keep the focus on solutions and actions. We've seen that if you have very tangible proposals on the actions and solutions to meet the needs of the newcomers and of the mentors themselves, you'll get much further ahead. Often we say, we're approached and said, well, if you're doing something like this for newcomers, well, what about something for young people or for Aboriginal youth or for other kinds of populations? What about spouses? Each of these groups have different kinds of challenges, and it's really important to make sure that your program addresses the primary challenge of those that you're trying to serve. I mentioned this already, support employers, be a resource to them, make it easier for them to participate, think about how what that might look like from your perspective, learn and share. Very quickly, there is a wealth of resources available to you all to help you grow, to help you expand. There are some really important lessons learned by specific mentoring programs across the country. So, they reach out to others. Most people are more than willing to share resources, and we will go into some depth about the resources available in the in-person session as well. Lastly, I'll end with this. When you are doing your work, make sure you have the time to actually document and tell the story. This is what generates interest in the community. This is what generates leads for new mentors. This is what ultimately speaks to the impact of your programs. So it's really important to not be pure about how you develop these blogs or stories or testimonials, but just to do it really quick and dirty often works out really impactfully, but make sure that you collect it, and there's a way in which you organize this so that it documents and it tells the story of your program, tells the story of mentoring. And it's really also important that this becomes a foundation to demonstrate success to your potential funders and your current funders, so that going forward you have great support for the program. So please continue to type in your questions, and I've got some questions here that are already, so let me just look at a couple here. So one of the questions was, what are the strategies, methods employed to get businesses to buy into the concept of mentoring? I think, we've spent a fair bit of time talking about the business case in this instance. We've seen employers don't just care about their own bottom line, but they care about the impact in the community as well. So it's really important, like I said, to tell the impact of mentoring in the community, how it showcases organizations, businesses that participate in the mentoring program, have an awards kind of recognition event for mentors and mentees who've done exceptionally well, have gone beyond the call of, what is required of them, and that generates really good buzz. Find ways to get media partners in your respective cities to take up this kind of work, and I think it'll go a huge way. But at the bottom line, a business is a business, and it's not in the business of helping newcomers find work. It has to appeal to their bottom line in the sense that it is a professional development opportunity, and that has to be articulated quite upfront. The next question is, could you speak a little more about the role of the mentor-coach? So I think the coach is a coach to both the mentor and the mentee. In the models that we've seen, the coach is a liaison between the mentor and the mentee in starting out the relationship, but is also a sounding board and a coach to the mentor to actually help the mentor be a better mentor. And so there are, again, online resources that a mentor gets from the coach that helps them go through certain exercises with their mentee. It helps the mentor identify the core skills that they themselves can bring to the table. So, the coach is a coach for both the mentor and the mentee, and the role is one of being basically a support, a convener, and someone to check in with every month so that, both the mentor and mentee feel supported in the mentoring relationship. Another question, if group mentoring is needed, how many IEPs should be assigned to one mentor? My understanding of this is if it gets to be more than 4 or 5, it gets to be a bit unwieldy because the group dynamic changes. Even when you have 4 or 5 mentees, you'll see that there's often 1 or 2 who might take more, who might need more attention than others. So I would recommend, if possible, limiting it to no more than 4 or 5. What strategies do you use to get mentors to commit for 24 hours? I think the case to be made for the 24 hours is pretty solid in the sense that it does take that amount of time for a mentor to really explore his or her contacts and then to see, make the introductions to the newcomer, but also to help the newcomer with mock interviews, to review their resume, their cover letters, to teach them about phrases that they should be using in their cover letters or in interviews through the, to helping them brush up on that, to help them understand which journals probably they should be reading, which magazines in the sector are the ones which have the latest info on labor market info or those kinds of things. So it does take a fair bit of time, and the first maybe couple of weeks are actually spent just getting to know each other. So the case for 24 hours is a pretty strong one, that it does take that kind of time. That's not to say that other models don't work, but we've seen that 24 hours seems to produce the best results, and it's also a fairly sustained commitment so that the mentor feels like they're actually doing something that's worthwhile and doing it well. The question is, do mentees have insurance that covers them while they are participating in relationship activities, job shadows, informational interviews? Short answer, no, we're not aware of any program that has insurance that covers them when they participate in these programs. More often than not, the mentors take it upon themselves when the mentee is ready to participate in these kinds of activities to take. So it's a judgment call that the mentor makes on that. Another question is, should a mentor of a group of IEPs provide more than 24 hours? What are some strategies for running a group mentoring program? I think a group mentoring program, we can also, during the in-person session, we can provide links to a toolkit for group mentoring that kind of answers some of these questions as well. But I would say, it's a slightly different dynamic. Sometimes the mentor of a group mentoring situation might focus with 1 or 2 employees past the 24-hour period, but typically not. There may be 1 or 2 folks who might need additional assistance, especially in the regulated occupations, especially if they're going to take exams and so on. We've seen that some mentors, stay, and in many instances we see that even in the one-on-one mentoring, quite a few of the mentors stay on in connection with the mentees, even though it's not part of a formalized relationship. Another question, if an IEP is not ready for work due to professional regulation or exams, where do you refer them to? I think in this instance, if they're not ready for work, if their challenge is purely around the professional regulation or if they need to take exams, it's to connect them with the regulatory body that would govern and to help them actually prepare for that process if they do want to practice in that occupation. Another way that we've seen mentors be useful to their mentees is to explore alternative careers in the short term that might help them ultimately get to that. But to have that frank and honest conversation that, it might take you a certain amount of time to find work in this occupation. Maybe you should think about doing something else in the short term with a view to keep an eye on that, or have the realistic conversation that it's going to be extremely challenging for you to work in this field in Canada. Here are some alternatives for you. That's the role of the mentor in many ways, to have that really difficult conversation so that you're providing real value to the IEP. Another question is, are there any mentoring closure processes in place to end the relationship? It's a good question. I wonder if more often than not there's a meeting at the end, the coach kind of signs off, brings them together, kind of signs off on this, and in my experience, most mentors and mentees do stay in touch, though they don't meet as often, not every week, but they'll go out and have a coffee or have dinner every other month or something like that. So they do stay in touch. I think one of the ways in which you can actually bring some nice closure is to actually have regularly scheduled receptions. These don't have to be elaborate, expensive affairs, but they can just be networking events that bring together people who finished their mentoring in the last 3 or 4 months together, and have a short kind of reception, which really ties it all in a nice bow and kind of links it to my earlier idea of having some kind of a mentoring recognition event once a year, where you're recognizing some really, mentors who've been very effective with their mentees, and you're also kind of closing the loop with several others who finished their mentoring in the last several months. So I think we've, I want to be cognizant of the time, and I want to hand it back to Kaylee very quickly, but I just wanted to tell you about, you can download the presentation, the PowerPoint presentation, from the link that appears on your screen. So if you are interested in having the text of some of what we talked about, you can please go ahead and download that. I'll move very quickly to the follow-up session. This will be an in-person session, and some of the areas that will be covered in that session are around, the critical steps to follow when setting up a program. We didn't go much in depth today, and in the follow-up program, we'll always link to the resources available from other mentoring programs that can help you expand or promote your program, because like I mentioned earlier, many of these mentoring programs have been very generous in sharing, everything from, communication tools to intake forms to evaluation forms that they use, all those kinds of things that you don't have to create from scratch yourself. Videos, promotional videos, audio clips that can help you make a strong business case as you're recruiting more mentors. Those kinds of things will be available in the follow-up session, but we wanted to come up with a few questions that would help us help us structure the discussion for the follow-up session. So these are some of the questions that we'll be trying to answer. What are the challenges that you might face in this process, and how can you address these challenges? And also, I think having the frank conversation with, sometimes programs don't work out, or not able to grow beyond a certain point, and what might be some of those impediments to actually being more effective. So, I'll hand it back to Kaylee now to tell you a little more about the logistics about the in-person session. Kaylee?
Great. Thank you so much, Peter. What a full lunch hour that was. It was so useful. So in terms of this follow-up session that Peter just mentioned, this will be held on November 27th, and it'll be in the afternoon from 1 o'clock till 4 o'clock, with sign-in starting at 12:30. So the location is Red River College in the CGA Manitoba Hall. We've had a few other sessions there, so this site should be familiar to those of you who've attended a previous one. So if you haven't already registered for this event, you can either do so by sending me an email. You can just write a message in the chat box if you'd like to attend and you haven't RSVP'd yet, or in the survey, which we will link in a few minutes just to follow up on this session. You can also input your information in there. So if you'd like to attend, that would be great. And if you do have any questions that you don't see addressed on this slide of the objectives that Peter just identified, you can either again type those in the chat bar, or in the survey there's also a place to input your questions, or again feel free to send me an email with those questions and we'll make sure that we get a chance to address those in that follow-up session. So just looking forward as well into some of the upcoming sessions in 2015, these will be sent out as well in a follow-up email along with this PowerPoint presentation with some of the resources that were discussed and with a link to access the recorded webinar so that you can share with any colleagues if they're interested in viewing it. But we have a few sessions coming up in 2015. So one will be a course on Foundations for Recognition of Prior Learning. Another will be on effective teaching practices for working with IEPs in the post-secondary classroom. So that will be coming up in February. And then we're also going to be putting on a mini conference on best practices for supporting IEPs and IEPs in Manitoba. But we do have some room in our schedule for some additional sessions as well before this project ends at the end of June 2015. So in the follow-up survey to this webinar, if you have any, big questions or any topics that you would like to see addressed either in this conference or in a future session, please provide that information, and it's really useful just in informing our development of future sessions, and that would be great. So again, if you have any questions, feel free to send me an email. Otherwise, here is the survey just to follow up on this webinar to get some feedback on your perspectives on the webinar itself and the content, and on future sessions as well. So Peter, thank you so much for spending your lunch hour working with us and sharing all this information. It was very valuable. So and thank you all for coming out and participating today. It was great to have all of you here.
Great. Thanks, Kaylee. Appreciate the opportunity. It was wonderful. Thank you.
So I will be in touch with everyone via email, just with these resources, as I mentioned, and to follow up on the upcoming session in 2 weeks. So I look forward to seeing all of you there.